Hello. Thank you so much for joining me on this very special day, as it is the day of my book launch, Go With The Flow painting. I am absolutely thrilled that it is now out in the world. I've worked so hard on it, and it's taken such an incredible amount of my energy, my creativity, but I am so proud of it. And in this video, I want to tell you a little bit about the process from the initial email that I received from the commissioning editor to choosing a photographer, and also how I was able to write the chapters and try and figure out the steps. Because although I'm a Skillshare teacher and I'm used to recording videos of the process and narrating what is happening on the paper, writing it out using words and trying to describe what is supposed to happen are two completely different things. So it was a huge learning curve. If you're new to this channel, please do hit subscribe. There are loads of other videos about watercolor technique, and I would be thrilled if you could comment and like this. Last year, in August 2021, I received an email from a commissioning editor at Quarto Books. I had worked with her on another proposal that didn't go through, and she said, I'm after a book on loose watercolor painting techniques, and I saw your organic expressive floral Skillshare class, which seems to be doing very well, and I would love to see you incorporate this style in a number of subjects such as animals, food, as well as florals. And from then on it moved pretty fast. I had a look at the contract, and then the next phase was to work on something called the BLAD. It stands for Book Layout and Design, and it's a means of presenting the layout and design of the proposed book. This had to be done pretty quickly, as she said the deadline is going to be February 2022, and that really didn't leave me very much time. The lady at Quarto was able to guide me through this BLAD. Was going to be 8 double-page spreads. This was going to be pretend spreads, but it would probably go forward into the real book. And the spreads that she decided on were a table of contents, materials such as the type of brushes I like to use, the characteristics of loose watercolor, colour mixing on paper, and something that's called a chapter opener, where they could see how I would lay out something like warm-up techniques. Also included were 2 lessons, and these were the step-by-step lessons where I had to write out roughly 8 to 14 steps of how each project would look like. The reason for this is the BLAD would be used by the publisher's sales team in order to sell to their potential customers, the retailers such as Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It would be composed of the front cover plus the 8 double-page spreads and give a clear sense of how the book was going to look. So it had to be really bright and colourful, and also capture the essence and personality that I was trying to convey with my words and pictures. We also had to think a bit more about the images that I would include and the photography. This is where Natalie came in. She was my amazing photographer, and I am so thankful to have had a chance to work with her on this book. Without her input and knowledge and support, it would have been a completely different experience. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a while. As I mentioned in the introduction, it's really difficult to describe the wet on wet technique using words without seeing the reactions that you're going to get. So I had to set up the chapters in a way where I introduced some of the concepts very slowly, such as what is wet on wet and how you have to look out for the different drying times of the paper and the different blending techniques you're able to use with watercolor. So I hope that some of these steps are going to be really useful for people using this book. And now we've got a chapter on warm-up techniques. This is really important for me to include because to launch straight into trying to paint like me, it wasn't going to be possible. So I hope that all the time that I spent developing some of these warm-ups so that you would able to understand how your brush behaves and how much wash it's able to load on the brush, it's going to be so helpful moving forwards. And there's even a chapter on using ink. I'm afraid with using dip pen and ink, it's a case of practice. Get a few different nibs, get a few different types of ink and find out how it behaves for you. A chapter on food was always going to happen because it's one of my favourite things to paint, and I really wanted to explore so many different options, and I think the results are great. I worked on so many different ideas. You can see that there's some chilies in there and there was even some lollipops, but she rejected that idea because she thought the others were a lot more colourful and a lot more achievable. So I'm really pleased that eventually we were able to settle on the projects that you see here. Now, animals was something that I am not familiar with at all, but she said in order to achieve a balanced book where they could incorporate the techniques that I'm presenting in all different projects, it was really important to show that it was approachable. So I made this project up almost at the end because she felt that we needed something to guide people into this section. And I had so much fun developing these projects like the snail and the turtle and also the chameleon. It's an area that I would love to explore more if I could paint, sea life, whales, elephants and giraffes as well. Now this balloon was actually in the blad, and she said that was something that a lot of people hadn't seen before. And if you look at me flipping down all these different balloons, how many times did I paint that balloon in order to be able to recommend the steps that I eventually wrote about in the book. Now this boat was particularly tricky to photograph and also to do the steps because it's quite advanced, because there's so many different elements going on. So I hope when you come to that project that it is explanatory. I put the florals right at the end of the book because it's something that is already available as a Skillshare class, and for me it gave me a chance to look at other flowers like peonies and also stargazer lilies, which are my absolute favourite. And this cherry tree at the end again was something that my publisher said we need something to fill out that last chapter, that last section, and I had an amazing time putting that project together. The reason you keep seeing piles of papers where I've just thrown it onto the table or piled it up like this is because it was a tremendous amount of work. I developed each project over and over again in order to understand the process and the mechanics and how the paint would behave, in order to write the steps so that you, the viewer, the student, could follow quite clearly. It was a complete labour of love, let me tell you. I could not have worked harder on any project. And I really hope the results for the people who are trying out the projects and the level of sweat and tears really comes through. Something I'd like to mention is the level of comparative freedom I had within the structure of this book. I was able to work with Natalie, the photographer, in laying out the step-by-step images, and she was able to take overhead shots at every stage, and she came round like a trooper every single week for about 2 months in order to get those images. Also, the cover image, although we had a little bit of the art direction from the supervising art director, it was really down to us where we arranged things, and the only requirement they asked of us was to put an area free where they could put the title and also my name. Overall, it was a fascinating experience, a real adventure, and something that I am going to remember for a really long time.